Okay, I think we are recording and the internet looks okay. Welcome to my session on company culture before, during, and after COVID-19. My name is Maggie, and I'm coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm actually on the tail end of a almost 3 week long road trip, and it's been incredible. So I'm starting to make my way back to Chattanooga. So thank you guys so much for spending your time with me. I hope that startup week has been incredible so far. I'm sure it has. So let's get started. 7 months. We've been living, or should I say, surviving for 7 months. COVID has taken a toll on all of us, no doubt. If I had to compare COVID to anything or anyone, COVID is like that really loud and annoying person who's always at the center of attention at parties. You know what I'm talking about. No one really knows who invited COVID. And as much as people don't like COVID, everyone ends up talking about COVID the next day somehow. As much as I don't really want to make COVID the main subject of this talk, I kind of have to, because I work in the people and culture space, and COVID has undoubtedly made a lasting impact on how organizations do culture. So my name is Maggie Caruth O'Connor, and I'm going to talk about company culture pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, like I just said. Before I do that, though, let me give you some background information, because you probably have no idea who I am, and that's fine. My husband, dog, and I just recently moved to Chattanooga almost 2 years ago in January, from Atlanta. He works for a local tech company called Ambition, and I work as a people and culture consultant through my recently founded boutique consulting company called the Canberra Group. In essence, I am passionate about helping organizations turn their company culture with control through data collection, analysis, and actionable strategies. So that's a little bit about me. When it comes to company culture, every single organization, no matter the size, has a culture. Culture is not ping pong tables and beer taps. Culture is also not your company-wide events and social gatherings. Those are kind of like the items on an a la carte menu. Culture is made up of the behaviors of people within an organization and the meanings attached to those behaviors. So again, every single organization, therefore, has a culture, unless it's made up of robots, which we're not there yet. So let's talk about company culture pre-COVID. There were essentially two camps, two kinds of cultures. You had old school culture and new age culture, or really, I'll just say people first culture. Old school, people first culture. I associate old school culture with old school management styles, basically. These management styles are behaviors associated with anger management issues, poor communication. Old school management ignores issues related to things that are top of mind at companies today, as they should be, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're also talking about ineffective conflict resolution, maybe no allowance or even minimal allowance for input or feedback, and then in really unfortunate places, even bullying and harassing. I think we can all agree that these behaviors have a negative effect on culture. This means employees are likely unhappy there because they have an old school manager, or they don't have a clear career path within the company, or they've been experiencing harassment or discrimination. So they leave as soon as they can, or even they're let go for reasons that appear to have come out of left field. These kinds of cultures exist at companies today, unfortunately, and they're wasting tens of thousands of dollars. Trust me, think about how much it costs to recruit, hire, and train someone. And I'm not talking about just actual dollars, it's the time involved too. If you are a project manager or you know someone who's a project manager and you know about their job, you know that time is one of the three basic outcome measures. It has value. Time has value just as the dollar has value. So this is how much it matters. For an individual contributor, on average, it costs 30 to 50% of their salary to replace them. 30 to 50%. So this is just an individual contributor, almost like an entry level person. So here you see on the slide, $60,000, let's say, is this person's salary. It costs on average $20,000 to replace them. That's for an individual contributor. For someone like a video editor or an account manager or a project manager, it costs 40 to 70% of their salary. So you'll see that number right there. That's how much it costs to replace them. Again, this is dollar signs and the time involved, everything involved. And for director level, like a marketing director and everything above, this is what it costs, 100 to 150% on average to replace that one person. So in sum, I hope you can see that it is very expensive to replace an employee who voluntarily leaves an organization. These organizations typically will have these kinds of old school cultures, old school management styles that I just alluded to. And obviously, with the old school kind of company culture, the day-to-day productivity is also negatively impacted. An Australian study by SHRM stands for the Society for Human Resources Management. An Australian study by SHRM conducted a survey of 478 HR professionals and 613 employees. So 1,001 participants, pretty healthy sample size. 58% saw a negative impact on productivity due to the effects of poor people management. 38% saw a negative impact on productivity due to the lack of motivation among employees. And 26% saw a negative impact on productivity due to ongoing organizational changes. So an example of that would be backfilling a role that doesn't ever seem to just stay the same person. That's an example of an organizational change. So clearly, poor management, among many other things, are bad for culture and are therefore bad for the bottom line. Other symptoms of old school culture are upper management withholding information, no work from home policy, or maybe lack of flexible working arrangements, end of year performance reviews as the only time to evaluate performance, end of year engagement surveys as the only time to check employees' pulses, so one time a year to see how employees are feeling, recruitment solely to fill a seat with a warm body, vague or cliche organizational values, core values like teamwork or grit, and a lack of organizational purpose. If I had to assume, all of these things are probably things that you've witnessed or experienced at some point in your life, whether first degree or second. But pre-COVID, it wasn't this way for all organizations. Organizations in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, and New York, and even Chicago have been on this intentional kind of people first culture ride for a while. And organizations in Atlanta have been for a few years. So what that means is people first cultures basically do what it says. They put their people first, plain and simple. From a leadership standpoint, people first cultures lean pretty hard into transparency. And I don't necessarily love that word because it typically isn't defined well at each organization. But on a high level, transparent leaders are leaders who know that their people are inevitably curious about what's going on outside of just their own day-to-day. They're curious about what's going on with the business as a whole, and they're curious about what the future may hold for the business. People first leaders communicate on those things regularly and honestly. Now, I think the key to that is defining what transparency means for your organization. In addition, people first cultures not only operate by a mission or vision, some have both, but typically you should have one at least, but also a purpose. So, purpose is different from mission or vision. I recently asked a friend of mine what he thought his company's purpose was. And he said, to be the best architectural firm in the state. I'd argue this is not purpose. This is a very vague vision. Purpose is the reason your organization exists. Vision, on the other hand, is the organization you are striving to become. Purpose is the impact you want to make on the world, and vision is the company you will be in order to affect that change. So, clear difference between purpose and vision. There is a fantastic digital engagement agency in Atlanta that has a very distinct purpose and vision. The purpose is literally plastered all over the website, all over their office walls. Their purpose is simply to inspire happiness. Their vision is to be sought after by the world's best companies for their creative problem solving. So people first leaders communicate these things and lead by these things. Hopefully you understand that there's a difference between purpose and mission or vision. People first cultures are also driven by very specific values, core values, that thus drive the behaviors they want to see and want to reinforce from their employees. So this means getting very specific with your values. This means really thinking hard about what you as an organization value from a work standpoint and from a behavioral standpoint. So this means spending time crafting values until it truly feels right. And this might mean recreating your values, knowing that now your values play a huge role in the culture that you want to cultivate. So I think that core values should be involved when recruiting and hiring people. They should be involved when making business related decisions. They should be such an integral part of your ethos, of your culture, that everyone at the company knows what the values are off the top of their heads. I'd also argue it's not crazy to have team specific values. My husband's old company had their own set of core values with his team that he and his team came up with together. And I think it's tricky to do, but you can do it right. There are definitely pros and cons. The pros are that you have a chance to incorporate your team into something that isn't just the day-to-day stuff. So for them, it gave them an opportunity to really lay some sort of foundational work for the team as opposed to just selling and selling and selling. He leads a team of SDRs and BDRs. So you're giving your team the chance to shape something foundational, like I said, and ideally long lasting, which will ultimately create team and company loyalty, retention. And with team specific values, your team feels even more connected to one another, the people themselves. The cons are that disconnected subcultures can arise, that can happen. Subcultures are completely normal and a part of every organization. For example, at the agency I used to work for in Atlanta, the vibe between the creatives and the account people, so different. Very different cultures, subcultures. That's okay. So to avoid too much of that disconnect, make sure that you can draw a direct line from the organization's purpose to your team's specific values. In all, the keys to honest and good and true core values are A, limiting the number of values. So I would argue anywhere from 4 to 6 core values, and B, not being cliche, like I have alluded to. The sweet spot, like I said, is 4 to 6 core values total. Why? If you are placing that much value on your values, that means you want other people to place value on them as well, which means they need to be able to remember them, honestly, plain and simple. Now, the other key is not being cliche. That's difficult, but it can be done because really at the end of the day, I think everybody does say, yeah, we believe in teamwork. If you are going to use a cliche term like integrity, try making your values more of a statement than just one word. So, for example, at our core, we stand up for the right thing, or we stand up for and do what's right. If you do choose to go down the one word value, be explicit. Give that one word value, core value, its own tagline, for example. Or better yet, be descriptive about what it looks like when employees live into those core values, which guides me to the next important thing, which is behaviors. So values should guide behaviors. People first cultures normalize consistent rewards and recognition based on those behaviors, both formally and informally. So this means implementing 360 feedback loops and conducting regular one-on-ones instead of waiting for mid-year or end-of-year reviews as ways to provide feedback and constructive criticism. This means recognizing people's growth by giving them attainable and reasonable career paths. This means rewarding people's hard work by giving them reasonable raises and bonuses. And lastly, people first cultures are layered with trust throughout all of the levels within the organization. Leaders trust their people, and those people trust their leaders and managers. Trust is definitely a two-way road with people first cultures, and productivity and retention significantly increase when employees and leaders trust one another. A 2016 survey of CEOs by PwC revealed that a strong majority of business leaders, 55% to be exact, believe a lack of trust in the workplace constitutes a foundational threat to their company. Moreover, compared with employees in self-described low trust workplaces, employees in more closely knit communities report that 100% are more energetic at work. 76% feel more engaged with their jobs. And 74% experience less stress. Take 13% fewer days off for illness, and 29% reported more satisfaction with life in general. So those are the two major types of cultures pre-COVID. You have old school culture and people first culture. And then COVID hit. Silly old COVID caused everything to shift. Among other things, it changed how we work, when we work, how we understand each other, and who and what we are within our organizational walls. So, how and when we work. Companies had to become comfortable with traditional working hours changing. This isn't new news, but COVID forced everyone to work from home. And if employees had kids, to literally teach and rear their children and work at the same time. People had to become accustomed to varying internet speeds and at-home distractions like kids and dogs. COVID forced everyone to utilize virtual meeting platforms in lieu of traditional face-to-face meetings. Zoom inevitably became super rich. Companies utilized Slack and other messaging platforms so much more. And ironically, those platforms are becoming a distraction of their own. Companies reimagined the purpose of holding meetings versus sending emails, which is never a bad thing. I am so pro email if it can be an email, not a meeting. Employees learned more about their colleagues from just a week of video calls than a month of pre-COVID office days because of those in-home interruptions and maybe the decor and the at-home surroundings. And unfortunately, we also saw mass layoffs. Some organizations arguably reacted too quickly and implemented layoffs to only rehire for those positions just months later. And yet with all of these changes, some necessary and some unfortunate, COVID was the catalyst for something good: widespread lessons on empathy. I think COVID leveled the playing field. We had presidents of companies, of organizations who were parents feel like they were in the same boat with maybe mid-level employees who were also parents. They could understand, they could empathize what it meant to be a parent at home and work. Instead of automatically thinking that an excuse someone gave for being late to a call was just a made up excuse, I think we also saw people beginning to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We realized on the deepest level how we as humans were truly relational beings. We found ourselves analyzing what our relationships at work and with our work look like. We found ourselves analyzing what our relationships with people in our lives, and I would argue with ourselves, looked like. We all gained, I think, more empathy, not only for each other, but also for ourselves. And we've also learned how the traditional office functions within our own workplaces. Literally, organizations had to take a hard look at the purpose of the physical office space and how it served the business. So, for example, you had REI selling their headquarters in Portland, which Facebook bought. You had organizations breaking their leases, costing them thousands and thousands of dollars, but maybe thinking worth it in the long run. And perhaps most importantly, COVID put on display the injustices and the inequalities that have been plaguing our country for far too long, causing, I think, all organizations to look within and come to terms with who they truly were. The unfortunate death of George Floyd reignited the Black Lives Matter movement, and this huge global cultural movement hit harder, I think, within our workplace walls, our organizational walls, than ever before. It forced leaders to look at their own diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, or maybe sometimes lack thereof. And if leaders weren't doing it, they certainly felt the push to ask the hard questions and talk about the uncomfortable stuff. So here we are, still in the midst of COVID. Now, when I think about the difference between old school cultures and people first cultures, I don't think about the organizations that are pivoting well and those that aren't. I mean, I could certainly list the organizations that are doing those things or some that aren't, but I think instead I put myself in the shoes of the people. More than ever, I think COVID has caused employees to truly understand their own purpose, their personal purpose. COVID has given us the time to discover these things and determine whether or not our own purpose aligns with their employer's purpose. So, sure, some people were forced to leave their organizations, but I can't tell you how many LinkedIn posts I saw over the last couple months that told a very similar story, a story of I was laid off due to COVID and I was devastated and worried. But a few months later, I found a job with my dream company, or I found my dream job. So, what's going to happen when we arrive at our new normal? Obviously, it's impossible to truly predict, but I believe the overarching themes will focus on DE&I efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, support systems, and trust. Diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, I think, must be top of mind for all organizations. As I mentioned earlier, the Black Lives Matter movement reignited the push to stare right in the eyes of racism in our personal and professional lives. In addition, the upcoming workforce will be the most diverse workforce ever. So there's really just no excuse to not have a diverse workforce and to not promote a diverse workforce. Pre-COVID support systems, even at the people first cultures, were a mix of in-office support and remote support, but the focal point was on in-office support. Support systems must change in our new normal, specifically how we support employees remotely. So new technology is emerging to help motivate and engage with and recognize employees. Those are the things that I've talked about before, the important things to people first cultures. Take ambition, for example. Ambition is a sales coaching and gamification software, and their best quarter ever happened smack dab in the middle of COVID. This is because organizations like the Atlanta Braves, FedEx, ADP, Verizon, they realized they couldn't rely on just video calls to engage their employees. Culture Amp is another fantastic tech company that is booming right now. They have been for a couple years, but probably more than ever now. That platform helps with employee engagement, feedback, performance, and behavior change. And if you aren't already utilizing platforms like Slack, um, Slack basically helps streamline internal communications with your direct reports, your teams, anybody internal, basically. Um, Slack eliminates all of the unnecessary emails. However, before you implement something like Slack, make sure you have rules and parameters set in place. It sounds silly, but it's a must. I've seen many organizations implement Slack or similar types of communications platforms too quickly. And before they know it, important things are missed. There's too many just random channels that are created. And then just the platform altogether becomes a distraction in itself. Aside from digital support systems, organizations are also going to have to learn how to trust their employees, point blank. I talked about trust earlier. Trust is key to people first cultures, people first organizations, but trust will also be incredibly important post COVID days in our new normal. To get to the point where trust is a two-way road, organizations need to do these things. Organiza- Organizations must provide a safe place for employees to speak candidly. Leaders must listen to that feedback. Organizations must provide employees with a solid foundation on which they can stand. That solid foundation, I'm sure you can guess, is company culture. So leaders need to analyze what their purpose and values are. They need to make adjustments if necessary. And leaders need to be specific and consistent with the behaviors they want to see out of their employees. And then they need to recognize those behaviors both formally and informally. So, by no means is any of this easy. These have been really stressful times, stressful months, but I do believe we'll reach the light at the end of the tunnel. Before we do, now is the time to start thinking about how your organization can change for the better. Hire someone in the people and culture space to help you design what the future of your organization looks like, or hire someone to help you analyze where you're at right now. That's also a great place to start. Corral your culture champions and give them the space and the time and the resources to help them improve their own culture. Just like trust, I think culture is also a two-way road. Culture is not built or turned from the top down or bottom up. It's both and. It's not one doing the people on the bottom doing all of the work or the leaders doing all the work. It's everybody. And at the end of the day, company culture isn't for the top 1% of an organization. It's for all of the people. And better yet, culture is owned by all of the people. So that's all I have. I want to give a big thank you to Collab for organizing Startup Week. What an incredible week it's going to be, and I just think it's an awesome thing that the city does and that Collab does for the city. Thank you to Collab also for allowing me to talk about all of this, and a shout out to co-starters. I was in a recent cohort to work on the beginning stages of the Canberra Group, my boutique consulting company on culture. So thank you guys to everybody. And if you have any questions or want to chat, send me an email at maggie@thecanberragroup.com. So thank you for your time.